Hey guys, how's it going? This is Natnator, and welcome back to the third and final part of the sixth and final installment of the Tales of the City series. I know that's a little confusing, but in other words, this is the last episode. I enjoyed this series all the way through. The writing was captivating, the scenarios were inspired. I hope you guys enjoy this finale. So as always, turn out the lights, get comfortable, and let the story be finished. The door said Z. Allen, nothing else. It was the kind of nameplate you usually saw on a college professor's door, but it was affixed to the front of an ugly little house on Laguna Street. It was so out of place that it made the stringer hesitate before knocking, and before she could work her nerve up, the door opened on its own. She was greeted by a bold, pop-eyed man, probably the same age as Marie Wayland. He smiled and greeted her by name. Dr. Olmsted said you'd be stopping by. Let's talk in the library. The library turned out to be a spare bedroom, converted into an ad hoc office, though there were a great many shelves full of aged books. There were two pictures on the wall, one of a young woman holding a baby, and one that seemed to be a much younger Z. Allen, surprisingly wearing a fireman's uniform. The stringer sat in the spare chair, notebook at the ready, and then she realized she had no idea what she wanted to ask. Allen came to her rescue. I suppose you want to know about the Daggonites. I do? I mean, yes, I do. Old Olmsted sounded annoyed when she called. She hates people pestering her about the Dagon thing, but I love to talk turkey about it, or tuna, as the case may be. The stringer could tell she was supposed to laugh at this, so she did. Are you on the board of the Western Neighborhoods Project? No, I'm just someone they keep on call, amateur historian, with my own peculiar specialities. In this case, the Esoteric Order of Dagon. What do you know about it so far? Not much. She scribbled the words Esoteric Order Dagon on her pad. The unfamiliar esoteric spelled in full, so she wouldn't mistake it later. I guess you're too young to remember the Summer of Love. I'm more of a winter person. Yes, there's not too many of us original flower children left. What people don't realize is that the counterculture wasn't just free love and walking barefoot down Haight Street. There were all sorts of, well, I hesitate to call them cults, but let's say new and alternate religions and belief systems that were popping up around that time, especially here in the city. Krishnas, the People's Temple, Scientologists, hell, even the Church of Satan. He made a vague gesture. And the Order of Dagon? Indeed, the Order of Dagon. Although, according to them, they weren't exactly new. They said they were thousands of years old, maybe tens of thousands. The Dagonites were something else, a special case, even in a time of special cases. What did they believe? Hard to say. They were very secretive, and there weren't very many of them. Maybe a dozen in this city altogether. They came from back east somewhere. Why'd they come here? Religious pilgrimage. They said this was a sacred site. They worshipped the ocean, you see. No, not exactly the ocean, an ocean god. They called it Dagon, but sometimes other names. Ketis or Tiamat or Aspidochalone? Yes, that was the one. He looked at her strangely for a moment. They said it was an ancient sea creature, older than the world, and they took just about any myth about a sea monster to be a story about their god, by some name or another. They were all completely nuts, of course. Even back then we could tell. The stringer pondered for a moment. What does this have to do with the ruins? Haven't you guessed? Before he disappeared, George Wayland was rumoured to be a convert to the esoteric Order of Dagon. So, the urban legends about human sacrifice. Related. The Dagonites didn't practice human sacrifice, of course, but they did have a peculiar ritual that made people ask lots of questions after Wayland disappeared. The words scribbled in her notebook jumped out at the stringer. The fire is the important thing. She bit her lip. They gave burnt offerings to their god, didn't they? That they did. Sea creatures were best, but anything would do. A dog, a chicken, the bigger the better, as long as it was dead already. You could burn objects too, if they were important enough to you. The bigger the better. Say, an entire building? Now you're getting it. And with Wayland believed to be associating with Dagonites, and all of them disappearing around the same time he did, and then his complex burns down, well, you can guess what people thought. The stringer was riding faster than she could keep up with. And this was an important ritual for them. The most important of all. A burnt offering at the right holy site was supposed to awaken Dagon, or Aspidochalone, or whatever you want to call it. And then... The stringer sat forward. Then what? Well, no one else ever could really figure that part out. Alan sat sideways in his chair a bit, looking at her in his peripheral vision. All they would ever say is that after that, you became one with Dagon. But they'd never say exactly what that meant. The stringer put her notes down. And they all disappeared? In 1966, virtually the same day as the fire. Alan folded his hands and arched his eyebrows, seemingly inviting her to draw her own conclusions. One with Dagon, the stringer repeated. Is there anything else? Not much. Here. He handed her a thumb drive. I have a special file on it, for when people come asking. The stringer blinked. Do people ask about this a lot? Not a lot, but often enough. I've never heard anything about it. Well, they usually don't share what they learn. Why not? You'd have to ask them, although, truth be known, I understand that most of them usually leave town for one reason or another. I've never talked to the same person twice about it, except for Dr. Olmsted. But why? Now Alan's face told her she shouldn't ask anything else. Taking the thumb drive, she thanked him and left. Sam had left another note on the door. We have to talk. The stringer ignored it. She stepped over a pile of bills overflowing the mail slot, going straight to her computer, plugging in the thumb drive, and not even bothering to check her email for the job offers that wouldn't be there. This was more important. She pored over Alan's notes, but in truth, She didn't really need them. She'd figured it all out. They'd given her all the answers that morning. The fire was the important thing, and remember what he said about Obi. In her mind, the stringer was 6 again, and her brother was waking her up, scared in the middle of the night, and pointing to the window. "It's the man in the water," he said. "He says I have to go with him." She looked at the window for a split second, and then looked away. Was there really something there? She didn't want to know. Instead, she hugged the covers tighter and said, "You're fibbing. If there's really someone there, then go get Dad." Randy shook his head. "I can't. I don't want him to know." His voice faltered for a second. "I did a bad thing," he said. I dug up Obi." "What?" She'd sat all the way up then, too angry to still be afraid. "I'm sorry," Randy said. She could tell he was crying. "He was my cat. Mine. I know. But I'd heard... they said that if you take something, something dead, and you burn it at the right spot..." "Burn it? You mean you... I'm sorry. I just wanted to see what would happen. I wanted to have something to show you when we snuck out. And now he says I have to go with him." And Randy pointed to the window again, and she had looked. And as much as she had tried to, she never really forgot the face she saw there. She'd run then, screaming into Dad's room, and he said that it was just a nightmare. But when they got back to the bedroom, Randy was gone, the window was open, and there was water on the floor. And nothing was ever the same again. She never told anyone what Randy said about Obi, and she never told about the face at the window, though for a long time she'd only ever remembered it in dreams. The photo made her really remember again. That shape in the water, just a little too familiar, just a little too human. Her phone beeped. She started. Hours had passed, and it was dark out now. She assumed the message was from Sam, and she was about to turn the phone off. But then she saw it was an unfamiliar number. The message said, "Come to Marie's. Hurry." And beneath that, "Remember Obi." That was all she needed. She was out the door in a flash. She barely had the presence of mind to bring her camera. She ran 2 red lights crossing town. What would the tickets matter? They could pile up, unopened with the rest of the bills. She came to Marie Whalen's house. The door was open, so she let herself in. That strange cat odor was gone. It had been replaced by something else. She found Marie at the foot of the stairs. She must have taken a nasty fall. Or perhaps, the stringer couldn't help but think, as she observed the wet and misshapen footprints still visible on the carpet. A nasty push. It didn't matter. The stringer wrapped the body in a blanket and then lifted the ungainly, long-limbed corpse and hauled it outside. Dear God, she thought. What if the neighbors see me? She hastened to get the body in her back seat as fast as she could. She searched the garage and came up with a gas can that had a slosh of liquid in the bottom, and she took that too. And then she was driving to the ruins. There were no tourists, no joggers, and no kids around this time. That was lucky. The trail leading down was steep, and she had a hard time with her arms full of the old woman's body, and dragging the gas can along too. She wondered briefly if she really had to go this far with it, but the text message had made it perfectly clear. George Wayland had needed to burn this whole place down to do the trick for himself and a dozen other Dagonites. Randy had only needed a cat, but he'd been 8 years old. The bigger the better, Alan had said, so the stringer wasn't going to take any chances. She suspected you only got one shot at this. The ocean wind was particularly cold that night. There was no moon, but she could see the great rock off the coast anyway. Was this the right spot? It had to be. Where else was there? She set the corpse down in the rolled-up blanket and doused it with gas. She hoped no one from the hotel was watching. She only needed a minute without anyone interrupting to do this right. The box of matches rattled in her trembling fingers. It took 4 tries to get a match that stayed lit, even with the wind. She held her breath, looking at the bundle on the wet sand. Was she really going through with this? But then the match dropped from her fingers, and a whoomp of heat and black acrid smoke hit her square in the face, and the decision was out of her hands. The fire burned out fast, but the heat was intense. Sickening fumes from the blanket's synthetic fibers mingled with even less pleasant odors. She held her breath as long as she could, and retched when she couldn't. Nearby, the waves crashed against the rocks over and over again. She watched as the body burnt down to bones, and the bones burnt to ashes. She expected at any moment for someone to come along, for her to see flashing lights and hear sirens, but it didn't happen. Nothing else happened either. When the embers were out, there was just a black spot on the sand and a lingering stench. The stringer wiped at her eyes. Was that it? Had she not done it right? Or was it that she'd been wrong? That there was nothing to the stories? That she was going... movement. Out there, somewhere. It was dark, but she could still swear that the huge rock, the small island just offshore, was moving. But that's impossible, she told herself. The water here isn't deep enough for anything that big. Unless most of it is buried in the ocean floor for thousands, maybe even millions of years, only stirring when someone made the offerings, when someone was ready to become one with Dagon. And that's when she saw the lumbering shape coming toward the shore, the man in the water. And not just one, lots of them were coming. Lots and lots, drawn by her signal fire. They paddled towards her, scaly flesh dripping with brine. She was glad it was dark. She still remembered that childhood face at the window. She did not want to see faces like that again. But she knew that one of those faces would be the one she was looking for. And then she'd finally be able to say that she was sorry. That she missed him. That she loved him. That she'd done all this just to see him again, one last time, no matter how. And then, the great rock, not a rock at all of course, was still moving out in the surf, and those things coming to shore would not just leave when she wanted to. She had made the offering. She had signaled that she was ready to become one with Dagon. She suspected that Dagon was not the type to take no for an answer. At her feet, in the tide, something splashed and slithered and slid through the muck on its belly. She saw something like a hand reaching up for her. If not for the wind and the surf, she would hear a roaring and crashing just offshore. It was time. It was time. Oh God. Wait a minute. Where did everybody else go? They left in the middle of my story. It's just been you and me here for a while. Wow. Geez. The place is closed. Chairs up and everything. Weird that I didn't even notice. You were paying a lot of attention to me. I guess I was. So, is it true? I mean, did you really? With the old woman's body and everything. Does that frighten you? Not really. I guess it should. It's pretty awful. But for some reason, it doesn't. So what happened then? Oh, lots of things. Do you remember what I said? That some people think Aspido Chalone is the fish that swallowed Jonah in the Bible. Well, everyone knows Jonah was in there for 3 days, but when he came out again, he might not have been quite the same anymore. Isn't that the point? I mean, he might have changed more than you think. That's what happens when you become one with Dagon. But you look perfectly normal. It doesn't happen all at once. My friends can tell you more about it. What was that? Sounds like something splashing. Those are my friends. They're coming here now. They want to meet you. But the bar is closed. That doesn't matter to people like us. Can you hear them on the stairs? Yes. Are you afraid? Yes. That's good. But don't worry, they'll all like you. And they have lots more stories to tell. They've been going around for a long time. I guess it'll be okay then. It will be okay, won't it? No.